Hi, good afternoon, everyone. And welcome to the keynote talk of this Day of Talks for Global Design Forum on the Resilient Green City. I'm delighted to be joined by Robert Greenwood, who's partner and managing director at Snøhetta. And he's going to give a talk, and there'll be some time at the end to ask some questions on those themes, and also invite some questions from the audience. Do you want to get straight to it, or would you like to introduce yourself a bit? Or
Okay, I think we go straight to it. Yep, my name is Robert Greenwood, a partner and director for Asia Pacific at Snøhetta. So what I'm going to be talking about today is really designing public spaces for people, making places that really engage the whole community and creating a sense of social sustainability.
Yeah, thank you.
So we start with Snøhetta. This is, I hope, the one slide I'm going to show that has the least people on it. It's actually the mountain Snøhetta in the middle of Norway. You can see 3 people there. I'm going to be talking about the singular in the plural, and how buildings are really about people. A thing we say about Snøhetta is that it's a place nobody is from, but a place where everybody can experience. And I think that that really says a lot about what architecture should be. It should not be about designing objects you look at. It's about designing spaces and places that people experience. And this is Snøhetta, the mountain behind, and the architects, designers in front. We're about 350 people, and this was taken just a few weeks ago on our biannual trip to the mountain. It's in some way part of our process that we get together, we talk and we walk. We are the singular in the plural, and that's how we want to create our buildings, and it's a sense of belonging and ownership that we want people to have to our spaces. Inside the book, it's called Collective Intuition. I don't think, unfortunately, you can buy it anymore. It's out of print. But the title, I think, is really a good one. If you really are working together as a team, involving people, involving the stakeholders, involving the users, involving the clients in a team-like way, you get to the stage where there's a collective intuition about what to do next. And the building, the space, the project almost designs itself. And if we see inside the book, 2 of the chapters that I think are really important in the green, generosity and public ownership. Our buildings, our places, they need to be generous. Our ideas and our concepts need to be generous. They need to involve people, engage people, so that they become a sense of collective ownership. And because we're designing and talking about public space for communities, it is indeed political space. If you just design villas, cabins, private projects, no, okay, that's private. But public space, it actually becomes political. And we turn the adage of placemaking around, shuffle it around, and it becomes making place for people. And that is really our starting point. And if you make space for people, you also have to accept that people are actually messy. They don't do what you want them to do. You cannot design people. They do their own thing in this space. That's why the place then becomes political. Here in Alexandria, we had no idea that this would be going on in our plaza. And ironically, in the Arab Spring, they actually built a human fence around the library in Alexandria to protect it against the mob and the revolution outside. I say ironically because when we were designing the building, our clients, the government of Egypt, said, this is a beautiful plaza, let's put up a fence. So quite ironic that actually the fence became a human fence of people wanting to protect their space in the city. Or in the Oslo Opera House in Norway, where The plaza for the opera is, of course, the roof itself. And on that roof, you can do anything you want, any time of the day, any time of the year, 24/7, 364 days a year. It's important because it really resonates with the attitude of the citizens of Norway. They don't like elitist cultural institutions like the opera. They are social democratic people. They want a democratic space. So by giving the plaza on top of the roof, it means that people can walk all over the roof, do anything they want on the roof, and own that space. And that's generating that feeling of collective ownership. Similarly, at the Ryerson University in Toronto, where the students themselves create their own space, their own place. There are no walls, there are no rooms. They create their own learning spaces themselves. So the architecture becomes this experiential and not theoretical. You experience architecture, you don't just look at it. And you experience architecture with all of your senses: eyes, ears, hands, touch and feel, smell. It's sensual and experiential. So at the Play Tower in Austria, these people experience two very different spaces, the one horizontal, the other vertical. And don't tell me that the kids on the top don't experience a different space to the kids below. At the Ground Zero Memorial Pavilion, the people on the outside are experiencing a different place to the people on the inside. And these kids at the entrance to the Opera House in Oslo, well, for them, it's not an entrance, it's a secret little space that only they can come to and nobody else. Or these two boys who've discovered that the sloping floor actually is a slide, and their experience at the opera is very different to yours or mine. Tactile, touching, feeling. And these kids walking down the roof, well, they're not walking down the roof, they're actually flying as they move down the slope. People on the outside looking in, the drama, is the drama on the inside or is it on the outside? And what we found out is actually we can go and talk to the people who use the building. We don't, as architects, we don't spend much time actually talking to people who use our projects. We tend to go there on the day of its opening, we take our photograph, and then we leave and we don't come back. But
I'm here, I will say a couple of times per week actually, and I've never actually been to the opera before, but for me it's like a really nice place to just hang out.
He's been 2 times a week, but he's never actually been to the opera, and I think that says everything about that space. It's not about buying a ticket and putting on your best suit and going to the opera, it's about experiencing the place.
Because it's a nice building on a nice place with a nice view, and it's...
He feels great. It's great. Not all of the comments are always good, but we have, of course, edited them. But these people are feeling...
First of all, to feel free and see around Oslo and the beautiful colors, because Oslo is a very busy city, so you can't see like the nature. So opera, when I'm sitting here, I can see the sea and the trees in the house, so to feel free.
She feels free. Free to be the singular in the plural.
I think the building is one of the best buildings because I like the color, white color of the opera.
She likes the white color. I think I totally agree with her. And this is why she likes the white color, because if you put on your best clothes, it looks great as a background to these couple. Or to these 4 guys, they think the white color is great too. They have, some of them have the right sunglasses. They all have the right footwear. and they're on this white surface. It's actually a surface designed by artists. It's a piece of art. It's not a piece of architecture. To get it through the building regulations, we had to define it as a piece of art because it's too steep and doesn't actually comply with the regulations. Made from the Carrara marble, solid pieces cut, making a pattern, a platform, an arena for the life of the citizens. Alone, together, you can be alone, you can be together at the summit or at the base, sometimes a lot more people, but whatever it is, there is no program. You cannot go and buy a hot dog or a cup of coffee or a beer. It's free, open, public space. You don't have to buy or pay for anything. Sometimes a lot of people, if they didn't get tickets to go on into the hall on the inside, you can see it on the outside. Feed the swans, fish your dinner, ski in the winter down the roof, or go swimming in the summer, August, but don't come too late, gets too cold, or actually explore the life underneath the opera roof. That will be a different talk. We'll go a little bit further back in time, but to the Alexandria Library. We were back there just 6 months ago for the anniversary, 21 years since it opened, and again, took the opportunity to talk to the people who use the building, the people who actually make the architecture. This is a picture just from 6 months ago, and I think you can see a library sitting there in this amazing city, but the whole city has gone through a pretty tough time since that library opened. The last 21 years in Egypt and Alexandria have not been easy for the communities who live there and the citizens of the city. So the library still remains, I think, as one little bubble within the city where you can find culture and where you can find a community. It's the plaza. You have to stand in line to get inside. Not many libraries where you have to stand in line to get inside. It's a place to be seen and to see. And we can talk to some of the people on the plaza.
أنا اسمي ماهر، عندي 16 سنة. أنا باجي المكتبة هنا من وأنا عندي 6 سنين. قضيت معظم وقتي طول الصيف طول ال10 سنين في المكتبة.
So he's been coming since he was 6 years old. It's a part of his community. Always people there, different shapes, different sizes, different colors, a lot of ladies. Some guys seem to be sleeping. Ladies seem to be working harder.
Cette bibliothèque, elle est vraiment impressionnante.
Ouais, elle est grande.
Ouais, elle est grande et puis les conditions d'études sont vraiment formidables.
I think it's important that it's a really big space. It's not a small room. It's a space where everyone can take part in a collective experience.
It's just a feeling when you set foot in the library. You feel so proud. And when somebody asks you, what do you do? And you say, I work in the Library of Alexandria, they go,
And just basically having the library here, even with or without knowing about the background and everything, it's like a center where we can come to be and come to learn and come to mingle with a lot of people who have the same intellectual sort of thoughts in mind.
And if you really want to know what people think about your building, well, you can talk to the taxi driver.
مكتبة اسكندرية جميلة ولطيفة والناس اللي ماسكينها أحسن وأحسن.
Times Square reconstruction is also an architectural space where it's all about the people, it's all about the life. This is the original Times Square, the 7 blocks that of Broadway across 7th Avenue, and where we, over a number of years, pedestrianized the space to create a pedestrianized, car-free experience. This is what it used to look like. This is now what it looks like. Safe, pedestrian space. But it's so full of people, it's almost hard to take photos of it. So why not take photos of the people? Simple flooring, very simple benches that people use in all sorts of different ways. Again, you cannot design for how people are going to use these benches, how they're going to use the space. And it's not about then the architecture as an object, it's about the space that people use, occupy, and create architecture in. And if you do all of these things, you actually make a safer city, you make a city that is less polluted, and actually, for the city, generates more tax income. Very different sort of project. This is a landscape project in the north of Norway. It's a little place, a resting place on the road as you drive north, a place to have a picnic, a cup of coffee. And we were asked to design a footpath that connects out into the sea to this little island in the fjord. The view is to the mountain in the distance, Torghatten, and our footpath. Well, they needed it because people were just walking across the sea at low tide and really disturbing the marine environment. So we created a footpath that reacts with the nature itself. So as the tide moves up and down, the footpath disappears. So if you come at high tide, it looks like you're walking on water. And if you come right at the high tide, the whole thing disappears. It's a simple interaction between humans, people, and nature. This is low tide. You can see the mud and the marine environment that we don't want people to walk on, and then these magic footsteps across the water that disappear as it comes to the high tide. And up in the north of Norway, I can show you now this cultural center, Korvamatta, as it's called, in the Arctic district of Norway, and it's a cultural center for the Sami community. They are nomadic reindeer herders who wander across the whole of the polar region, Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Russia. And they've never really had a cultural center for the community to build their identity and their culture in. So this is a theater and a school for reindeer herding. So it's combining a theater and actually a slaughterhouse for the reindeer, right in the middle of the big plateau up in the north of Norway. It's called Korvamatta because that's the part of the reindeer antler that attaches to the head. And that's the sort of shape of the plan. So hugely important to generate a sense of cultural identity, take care of that identity that exists in this region. Jumping to Asia, I'll show you a few projects that also I think are important community projects, places where people can create their own spaces. This is in Hong Kong, and it's a clubhouse for the residents of the towers around. And what we created there is an urban farm and an urban farmhouse. So this is the farmhouse. And on the slopes in front of it, a stepped terraced urban farm. You can grow your own vegetables. People in Hong Kong tend to live in very, very small apartments. They don't have their own gardens. So it's a communal garden. You can harvest your crops. You can take it up to the farmhouse here. And we've created what is the longest long table in Hong Kong, stretching the whole length of the building. Here you see the stepped terraced garden below and the clubhouse at the back. Also just opened last year in December the new library in Beijing. Similarly to the library in Alexandria, this is one big, large, open space. So within this glass wall is a new landscape, man-made landscape, where we have the open reading room of the library. And previously, Alexandria Library was the world's largest reading room. This is now the world's largest reading room. They've taken over that position. And just as in Alexandria, it's a space where people can come and meet, learn, read, but learn and read together. It's a large space. You can sit on these terraces and look out across the landscape. You can lift your gaze from looking at the book or the screen out to focusing in the distance and letting your imagination soar. A place to be together. And staying in China, I'll show you some images from the new opera house that we're designing in Shanghai, in the Pudong area of Shanghai. It's on the expo site along the river in Shanghai. Similarly to Oslo, this then will become a huge public plaza. It's inside a large green park. It's all about movement in time and space. And the roof opens just like a Chinese fan to create the surface, the public space, but also the volume for the theaters below. 3 large theaters, 1 big public roof, creating a plaza and a viewing platform out to the Pudong skyline, foyer, theaters below, and these are some of the images from the construction site. It's going to be opened next year in 2025, and here we're looking underneath the big fan roof. Sorry about the wind. And I'm sure just like as in Oslo, when this opens, it's going to be full of people creating their own spaces and their own collective ownership of this place. It's rather too easy to take photos at the moment, so excuse me for having so many. I really can't wait to see this full of people. Daytime, nighttime. Some, I'm sure, will also go to the opera. Hope many will go perhaps twice a week. And then in Riyadh, also a similar project, not an opera house, but a metro station, one of the main metro stations at the old city. This big canopy, it's a public space shaded by the canopy. The canopy then acts as a periscope to direct your view down to the sunken garden and the lines below. But this again will be a huge public space in Riyadh. It's going to be opened later this year. Here you can see the outside canopy looking into the mirror surface you see down into the garden below. I think it's already going to be a really important public space in the city, a city that doesn't really have public spaces at the moment, and a place to congregate. Shaded, entrance to the metro station. And that'll be the view from below, looking up, where in the underside of the canopy, you'll see the 360-degree view of the city around you. But finally, I'll give you a little teaser to what I think is one of the most important projects we're working on at the moment. And it's about making place for people, but making place for stories. And the project is in Belfast. It's the Belfast Stories. It's a project that we're only just starting on. So I can't actually show you any of the images because we're just about to release the project and go into community engagement up in Belfast. So unfortunately, it's the people in Belfast who are going to see it first, but a little bit of a teaser for the project. It's about creating a place where we can tell stories about the community, told by the community, for the community. A unique experience. Yes, it will be a landmark building and a confident statement for the communities of Belfast. Who will be telling the stories? Well, all of the people from Belfast. And it's not just one or two communities, it's not just green and orange, it's actually very many different communities in Belfast, all with their own stories that make up this pattern, this complex urban city. It'll be a city that is both a mouthpiece and an earpiece. It'll be for speaking and for hearing, and it'll be a recorder and a broadcaster. So hopefully later this year we will be launching the project, and you can all see how it turns out. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I was wowed by the ways that the people have been using those spaces, and I wondered, obviously in terms of a resilient city, in a social sense, it's an occupied city, it's a used city, it's a loved city, it's working well for its citizens, and I wondered if there were any kind of key ingredients you kind of have in your toolkit when it comes to design a new space that you've gathered from working on all these amazing projects, learnings that you've picked up from how people use space that you you aim to put into each project.
I'm not sure if you can learn so very much about how people use the space. As I was saying, it always comes as a surprise, and that's fine.
Yeah.
So in a way, you just can't actually design for people. You have to allow people to use the space. I think it's important that you engage with people during the process.
Yeah.
So the process of design is really the key aspect, that it is a process that is inclusive, that has engagement, has consultation, and where all of the stakeholders and the users can take part in that process. And if you manage to do that, as I hope we're doing in Belfast, then you can get a project that really does generate public ownership.
Yeah. And are there specific methods that Snøhetta uses in terms of community engagement right at the beginning of the project that kind of feed into the design?
Obviously, there are many different layers and levels of this, but yeah, we do try to, before we design any building, before we design any project or draw any lines, to try and bring as many people as possible into that discussion to really find out what the vision and what the concept for this project can be, and to do that in a collective way before we actually start designing.
Yeah. And I wondered, because obviously these projects are in all different parts of the world, very different cultures. Are you sort of designing for like cultural specificity and thinking about climate and location? Or are you sort of thinking more about the universal human experience, the things that, kids having fun in space, the way we respond to a public plaza or a large library space? I wondered sort of what the balance is of, tapping into these things that all make us feel a sense of belonging, and then specific cultures.
I think it's both these things. So very much agree that there is a universal experience of space. So a kid in Oslo will love to crawl on those steps and use their hands to feel it and experience it. That'll be the same in Shanghai or in Riyadh.
Yeah.
So these are universals, but obviously there are specifics, cultural specifics, both geographical and climate-wise, but also there's a historical and cultural context. For example, the theatre for the Sami theatre up in north of Norway, where it's actually freezing cold most of the year. You obviously experience that in a very different way. So you do have to bring both of those in.
And I guess in these contexts, you're asking people to respond to a space they've never responded to before. You said the Sami people hadn't had a building, a cultural centre before. So you're sort of designing for something, you're asking people to react to something, and that's an unknown, right? You don't exactly know how they want to use it.
It's an unknown, and it'll be incredibly exciting to see how people react to the opera in Shanghai. Yep. I can't wait to actually go there. We've already now experienced how people use this great reading landscape, learning landscape in Beijing, and that's incredibly exciting. So we do actually want to document that.
Yeah.
But no, you don't know. I think it's an unknown, but you want to make it possible.
Yeah, yeah. And another thing that struck me was the importance of this plaza and this landscape that invites people to inhabit it how they want to, rather than sort of instructing them too much. And I wondered, some people had gone to the Oslo Opera House and they'd never been to the opera, but they love the space and they feel that is theirs. So are there lessons from designing, outdoor space that can be translated indoors? So I noticed the library, the second library that you showed us, there's sort of tiers to it, and it's sort of, it seems more informal, like someone might rest there or sit there, but it's not a seat. So are there these little cues that can be designed in?
I think so. I think the beauty of the roof in Oslo, and I hope in Shanghai when that's finished, is that it's not thought of as a building.
Yeah.
It's thought of as a piece of nature in the city. As a piece of nature, it's open to everybody.
Yeah.
And there are not prescribed ways of walking or using the space. And the library in Beijing is very much that sort of space, but indoors.
Yes.
So you can find in that landscape, you can find your own space.
Yeah.
Your own space, it can be quite intimate on the small terraces, but you're part of something bigger. And I think that's one of the key points about these outdoor plazas or these indoor big spaces, that they are a part of something bigger, and you as the individual feel a part of something bigger.
Yeah.
And that's what generating a community must be all about.
Yeah. And what about the role of the cultural institutions, so the libraries, the museums? Are they, obviously they're under pressure, like speaking of the museum that we're in, to kind of be more inclusive, to invite more people in. They are places for everybody. So I wonder, are they also seeking this, designs which bring inclusivity to the fore? Are they, is that something they're actively seeking from an architect's design?
Oh, I think so. I mentioned that in Oslo, that the Oslo Opera really needed to find a way to engage with ordinary citizens, not just the cultural elite. And certainly the plaza was a beautiful way of doing that.
Yeah.
I think it's brought people inside the opera in a completely different way.
Yeah.
And the institutions are really, really important. Alexandria is an extremely good example of that. So the role of the institutions that is important in Alexandria, a city that's gone through all sorts of turmoil and crisis over the last 20 years. Having an institution like the library in that city has created its own environment, its own community that people can tap into, and something that is stable and reaches out. That is also the case, I'm sure, when we do actually finish the Belfast stories, that again, an institution that is reaching out into the community, inviting the many communities to take part in its activities. So how they get used, the way in which they are used, the way in which they're operated is really essential to creating a lively, social, and relevant space.
Yeah, and I'm interested to know, the architect's role here is perhaps to show these institutions what's possible. I mean, if you asked the Oslo Opera House, we're going to have people skiing down here and fishing off the side. I mean, are they generous to those opportunities that they may not have imagined until an architect suggested it?
Oh, I think the opera is very open to that. However, if you'd asked the clients before when we were designing, if we could have people swimming here or skiing here, they would said no, we don't want it. Yeah. But as soon as you've completed it, as soon as it is there, it's just so obvious, and you can't stop people from going there. Yeah. It sort of creates its own life, its own logic.
Yeah. And on that, I think I was really interested why you said you had to say it was a piece of art rather than a piece of architecture to kind of meet these regulations. And sometimes we have these, you have some beautiful examples there of what a public space can do. But a lot of times designers are up against this very risk-averse, sort of safety-conscious aspect to public spaces. How can we sort of create a situation where we say it's okay, it's going to be okay, people know how to deal with space, people know how to stop their kids crawling off the edge of this plaza? It feels like, I don't know, that we somehow have ended up in a very safety-conscious urban environment sometimes.
Yes, we do, and obviously we do need to stop the kids from falling off. That's pretty important. But there are many spaces in the city and around the city in nature that are more dangerous than the opera roof, for example. It's a balance, and it is different from place to place, and you have to find that balance and what can work.
Yeah. And before I ask some questions from the audience, is there, has Snøhetta's approach to this kind of approach designing public space changed over time? Obviously, you have an incredible portfolio of projects in all different parts of the world. Have there things that have slightly changed about how you do things, or are there things which are stayed true to the founding principles of Snøhetta?
I think you're always pushing the boundary on what is possible from the one project leads on to the next. So I think there's a clear generation as we've moved through the projects, and a clear connection between, for example, Oslo to Shanghai. But they will be very different spaces, and that's something that we really look forward to seeing, because I don't think the people of Shanghai are going to use it in the same way. Yeah. So there's a connection. Yeah. And the one project really does lead on to the next.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Well, I'd like to ask if there's anybody in the audience who has a question for Robert.
Thank Thank you. I found your talk very inspirational and interesting, and I have a question about inclusivity. So you were talking about how people interact with the space, and I was thinking, have you also thought about how maybe someone who's visually impaired could experience the space equally as someone who's sighted with the beautiful view that you see around? Thank you.
Yes, I think all the work we do really does have to be accessible. And honestly, people do experience space in different ways. And I think that is something we need to understand. Some people obviously will need more help than other people. And we can't make every space as accessible for everybody at the same time. The roof in Oslo is not accessible for wheelchairs necessarily. That's something that probably we could rethink. That's something that I think in some of the ones we're doing now, for example, in Riyadh or in Shanghai, you can more easily actually get to the spaces if you're physically impaired. So it's a bit of a cultural question. What works in one place wouldn't necessarily work in another place. But there are many ways of experiencing architecture, and eyes, ears, touch and feel. We'd like to use all of these, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay, anybody else?
Thank you so much. That some very inspirational places, and I just written down where I need to go now to go visit. My question really is about building materials and wonderful, wonderful marble, lots and lots of concrete, I'm guessing. I'm just wondering about, one is alternative materials, and two is what the lifespan might be for some of those buildings, and what did the client ask for a lifespan? Your comments would be gratefully received.
Yes, there is a lot of concrete. There's granite in Shanghai. There's marble in Oslo. There's timber in northern Norway. The lifespan of these buildings, for a lot of them, is very, very long. So I think for the Oslo Opera House, the lifespan for the structure is 200 years. Every part of the building cannot have the same lifespan. But they're very built to be robust. I think the choice of materials is always going to be a different conversation. In Oslo, we actually chose the marble. It was a big decision for the national government that we were doing a major public building in Norway and we were not using a Norwegian stone. The choice of marble was really to do with the light and getting a roof that is always going to be bright all year round, and it does get very dark in Norway in the winter.
I mean, the marble is fantastic. I mean, I absolutely understand why you picked the marble. It's just, I suppose my concern is about the huge, huge use of concrete, and probably there isn't another way to build those structures other than using that sort of material.
Those big roofs, Oslo or Shanghai. Well, Shanghai is actually built much more with steel, so it's much less concrete. When we built Oslo, yes, it's a concrete structure. Moving ahead now and thinking about carbon footprint and how we use materials, well, you know, often we have to use concrete, and then we have to look at how we can make concrete better, that doesn't have a big carbon footprint. And there are ways, so I think that's really the solutions we need to look at.
We're a long way off, though, aren't we, really? It's a tricky one. Anyway, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there another question?
Hello, this is Dayagam. I'm an architect, and actually I came from Riyadh all the way to attend this, let's say, talk from the Architecture and Design Commission. I'm currently leading an initiative called Urban Transformation because we're facing the challenge that you have mentioned. We don't have public spaces in Riyadh, and we're trying to overcome this challenge. But I think two main things we're facing challenges with that I need your advice on, is how to make people wanting to engage more, because I think that's a cultural thing we have. They don't tend to want to engage in a lot of community engagement strategies that we have. And the second thing is temperature, because most of our public spaces, even if we have them for 6 months or half of the year, we can't use them because temperature actually can go up to 50 degrees and it's impossible to stay out in these spaces. And when you close them and you put AC, it's not an open space anymore. So how can you tackle these two problems? Thank you.
Okay, so creating a situation where people feel they really want to use the space and find a space relevant as a part of their city, I think is about public ownership. It's about feeling ownership of that space, that it's your space and not somebody else's space. And then to generate that, I think you need to have an inclusive process in the way in which the space is designed and organized and run. Climate is obviously hugely important, not just in Riyadh, where it's really, really hot, but also up in the north of Norway, where it's really, really cold, and it then creates different solutions. So the metro station that we're doing in Riyadh, that I showed some photos of, actually has an open public garden below the ground, underneath the canopy. So 30 meters down, out of the sunlight, we actually can create an ambient temperature without having the AC on. So I think there are ways of doing this, being responsive to the climate, creating shade, allowing for natural ventilation. And then you get spaces that are very different in different places. So Riyadh is very different to the north of Norway.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we're coming to the end of our time now, but if you have any extra questions, please come and find us at the end for a little chat. It remains to say thank you so much to Robert for giving the beautiful talk and being so generous with your answers to our questions today as well. I think we're all very inspired by the work you've shown us and the approach Snøhetta takes to welcoming people and fostering that sense of belonging in public space. So thank you very much for your words.